When the four Pevensey children stumbled through the wardrobe and into the land of Narnia, they were soon identified as the two sons of Adam and the two daughters of Eve that the faithful Narnians had been anticipating. Their ancient prophecies talked about four human saviours coming to dispel the wintry curse of the White Witch. I'm not a C.S. Lewis expert, but I wonder if that was his nod to Jesus, using his favoured description of himself as the Son of Man, or if you like, the Son of Adam. This is our penultimate week in our Mark series, which, if you remember, began way back in May of last year. And one of the consistent themes running through Mark's account is this question: who is Jesus? This question is repeated, as I say, and then it peaks right in the very middle of Mark's Gospel when Jesus asks his disciples, well, who do you say that I am? In Mark 8. Well, Mark gives us the answer. He steals the punchline right at the beginning when he gives us, if you like, his executive summary in Mark 1 verse 1. He says, this is the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. And the account of Jesus' life that Mark captures ends with this Roman centurion having seen how Jesus died, then concluding and declaring, surely this man was the Son of God, in Mark 15. You know, belief in this profound truth that Jesus is both fully God and fully human became the basis of the Christian faith that followed. Therefore, understandably, we now often interpret the authors and the centurion's declaration that Jesus is the Son of God as evidence of his divinity. That Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, this three-in-one Godhead whom we worship. And while this is true, the detail is a bit more involved, and I suggest a lot more wonderful than that. Other than back on Easter Sunday and in the 6 short devotional videos we released in the lead up to that, this is the only sermon that we're drawing from Mark chapter 14, 15 and the beginning of 16. And so today, in thinking about it, I thought we would take a rare opportunity to focus in on one significant moment in the lead up to the crucifixion. That's Jesus' first trial before the Sanhedrin. And we read about it in Mark chapter 14 from verse 53. Now, it's significant because it helps us to understand Jesus' identity and who he thought he was. I suggest also it was a key turning point that led to him being nailed to the cross. So let's read Mark 14 from verse 53. It says this: they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say he will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another not made with hands. Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You've heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned condemned him as worthy of death. Some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists and said, "Prophesy!" And the guards took him and beat him. Well, dramatic moment, as you can appreciate. I'm going to focus on two titles about Jesus. Firstly, Jesus, the Son of God. And then secondly, the Son of Man. It's the Son of God. Already touched upon it, but other than Mark at the beginning and the centurion at the end, as I mentioned, the only other times Jesus is called the Son of God in Mark's Gospel is by evil spirits. In Mark 3, we read that as Jesus was expelling evil spirits out of people, the common response from them was, "You are the Son of God." And then when Jesus drove the whole legion of evil spirits from one distressed man and into a herd of pigs in Mark 5, he explained, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" However, it was the high priest here who gets very close to saying the same in our passage. When he asked Jesus directly, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" in verse 61 there. Now, in Matthew and Luke's account of this very same event, they swap the phrase, "the Son of the Blessed One," for "Son of God." I guess the meaning is the same. Perhaps Mark is being more literal in his quotation because Jews were reluctant to speak God's name for fear of offending him. Retrospectively now, we often interpret the phrase "Son of God" as evidence of Christ's divinity, but that wasn't necessarily the case at the time. You know, those described as God's sons in the Bible were often either Israel, the nation, or their kings. So let me give you some examples. During the 10 plagues that God sent to help the Israelites escape slavery in Egypt, God told Moses to tell Pharaoh this in Exodus 4. "This is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. And I told you, let my son go so he may worship me. But you have refused to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son." Jeremiah the prophet uses the same kind of imagery for Israel when he quotes God as saying, "Is not Ephraim my dear son, the child in whom I delight?" Ephraim, of course, being the dominant tribe in the northern kingdom of Israel at the time. And then, likewise, God refers to David's heir, King David's heir, in a similar way. In 2 Samuel 7, he says of this son of David that "I will be his father and he will be my son." That's God speaking. And the psalmist picks up this theme when prophetically referring to a future king of Israel who would call God Father and be appointed God's firstborn. That's in Psalm 89. So now in the Gospels, the use of the title Son of God to refer to Jesus is often used in conjunction with the word Messiah. And that's the case we come to here. In our passage of the trial before the Sanhedrin, this high priest questions Jesus in verse 61 with both of these phrases together, suggesting that the terms Son of God and Messiah were relatively interchangeable. And we've got evidence that that was the case, at least amongst the Qumran community, who were a Jewish monastic sect who lived at the time. We've got lots of records of them and their beliefs alongside the Dead Sea Scrolls, which you might have heard of. Now, the word Messiah in Hebrew, or Christ in Greek, literally means anointed one, and refers to the many Old Testament prophecies anticipating the one through whom God would rescue and restore Israel. However, the expectation wasn't that the Messiah would be God himself. The prospect, the idea that the promised Messiah would be God incarnate, God made flesh, made human, was far from their thinking. Therefore, at the time, This label, Son of God, was shorthand really to refer to the prophesied Messiah King of Israel. Yes, promised and sent by God, but if anything, the title Son of God therefore emphasizes Jesus' humanity rather than his divinity. So let's now look at this title, the Son of Man, a bit more closely. I know in between those 4 or 5 uses of the phrase Son of God in Mark's Gospel, always attributed to other people, we've noted, Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man 14 times. It's his favoured title for himself, often talking about himself in the third person. And naturally, I guess, we think of this as Jesus' claim to be human. Just as Edmund and Peter are described as sons of Adam and Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve in the Chronicles of Narnia, if you know those stories. The fact also that God repeatedly calls Ezekiel a son of man, small s, small m, throughout that really long prophetic book of his, indicates that it is possible to simply interpret Son of Man as meaning an ordinary person, like you or I. However, there is more to it than that. Having confirmed that he did consider himself to be the Messiah and the Son of the Blessed One at his trial with his response, I am, Jesus then went on and added, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven in 62 of our chapter. Now, this I am statement that he gave, perhaps a subtle nod to his divinity, because we know, don't we, that I am is the meaning of God's covenantal name, Yahweh. But labelling himself as the Son of Man is a much more explicit claim to being God. It's clear just in this event, this trial, as we see things progress, that Jesus was upgrading rather than downgrading the accusation made against him. It's his claim to be the Son of Man that seemed to seal the high priest's consternation, conviction of blasphemy, and condemnation to death. So you might ask, well, why was this claim the one to trigger the high priest to rip his clothes off, to bring the trial to an abrupt end, prompting this immediate abuse physically and verbally of Jesus, and then eventually sealing his fate on the cross? Whatever it was much more serious than simply the claim to be Messiah and Son of God, at least in the eyes and ears of the Jewish religious leaders at the time. You know, up to this point, Jesus had been strangely quiet at his trial. We're told at the start of verse 61, he remained silent and gave no answer. Really fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy, which speaks of God's suffering servant being oppressed and afflicted, yet not opening his mouth, led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep before a shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. That's in Isaiah 53, verse 7. I'm a city dweller. I don't know anything really about sheep rearing, but I'm not sure why really sheep bleat at many other threats, kind of mild threats, but when faced with imminent death, they suddenly go silent. Perhaps acting dead is their survival instinct, or perhaps, as Isaiah seems to be implying here, they're deceived into thinking, oh, it's just another day where I'm being sheared or milked maybe, and I'm none the wiser to their fate. Well, whatever the reason for the silence of the lambs in those instances, Jesus' refusal to defend himself was much more conscious and deliberate. You know, over the 3 years of Jesus' public ministry, Jesus had tried to keep his true identity at least somewhat hidden, at least from those who opposed him. You might remember he regularly silenced demons, declaring who he was. He discouraged testimonies for those who were healed or delivered. He taught in parables. And now he's also referring to himself with this somewhat enigmatic term, Son of Man. You know, throughout Mark's Gospel, we get this again and again. And perhaps it was just another part of his strategy of giving enough to inspire faith in those who would believe, and to keep his identity a little bit mysterious to those who wanted him harmed. Just enabling Jesus to get through all that God had in store for him until the time was right. And this was the moment. This was the moment Jesus chose to break his silence, to explicitly acknowledge his true identity, even to his fiercest and most dangerous critics, these religious authorities. And the clue to understanding his Son of Man claim is in what else Jesus now says about it at his trial. He says this, verse 62, "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Now, he had used a similar phrase to this earlier, not much earlier, when teaching his disciples on the Mount of Olives. We looked at it back in Mark chapter 13. He said, "At the time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory." But before that, he'd never made those extra references to the Son of Man. But now, at his trial, he's gone public. These were a specific reference to a familiar prophecy in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Daniel had this vision about 4 strange beasts representing different earthly rulers and their empires. And then Daniel sees one like a Son of Man, whose rule and reign would eclipse them all. Now, the original Hebrew for Son of Man is Bar Enash, which does simply mean human being. But scholars have decided to stick with a literal translation in Daniel 7:14, Son of Man, because of Jesus' reference to it here at his trial. So let's just go back and read what Daniel actually said about this mysterious figure. Daniel 7:13, "In my vision at night I looked," said Daniel, "and there before me was one like a Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven." Sound familiar? "He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." So Daniel's Son of Man, yes, small s, small m again, is clearly human, but he's unique. He's unlike any other human being ever. Not only is this particular Son of Man able to approach God, described here as the Ancient of Days, and live, but he's able to equally share God's throne and authority, be worshipped alongside him, and establish and rule over God's eternal kingdom. The question then, did Jesus ever claim to be God? I would say yes. And this moment is the clincher for me, and explains why what he said that day in court caused so much scandal, conclusions of blasphemy, and sentence to crucifixion. You know, on the day I prepared this sermon, my daily reading plan took me to the account of Stephen's martyrdom in Acts chapter 7, and the parallels with Jesus' trial are uncanny. Stephen also stood trial before the Sanhedrin, the same group of people, on jumped up charges and before false witnesses. And likewise, his death sentence was triggered when he saw a vision of Jesus at the right hand of God. And then he declared, "Look, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." That's Acts 7:56. And the reaction of the Sanhedrin was equally dramatic and horrific then as it had been for Jesus. We're told at this they covered their ears and yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him, dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. Such was this claim that Jesus is the Son of Man. Now, Stephen's faith in Jesus' divinity is what killed him. And that was expressed by referring to Jesus as the Son of Man. Interestingly, it was another Roman citizen who looked on at these events approvingly and would only later conclude, surely this was the Son of God. But this time it was a Pharisee named Saul, rather than this unnamed centurion in Mark 15. Okay, well, I just want to draw out 3 implications based on Jesus being the Son of Man to highlight today. Firstly, I find it really comforting to know that God knows what it's like to be us. The Creator has personal experience of so many of the classic conditions of his creatures, of us. And Mark's Gospels helped us to appreciate that as we've gone through, because we realise Jesus knows what it's like to be tired and hungry and sad and frustrated and angry. Jesus knows what it's like to grieve and to suffer. Jesus knows firsthand what it's like to be tempted and betrayed and rejected and misunderstood, to be alone and abused and be a victim of injustice. God knows what all of that is like personally. As the writer to the Hebrews puts it, for we do not have a high priest, not talking about the one in the Sanhedrin, but the high priest, Jesus Christ, who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who's been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. As well as receiving God's sympathy, seeing Jesus press through, overcome, remain victorious through each of these very human trials also provides us with hope. That by standing in him by faith, by walking in step with his Spirit, we can too. Secondly, I think there's a challenge here for you to decide, who do you think Jesus is? Mark doesn't allow us to escape this question. Again, C.S. Lewis, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, famously argued that believing Jesus was purely a moral teacher is not an option. With strong evidence, as I've tried to outline today, that Jesus clearly, explicitly claimed to be God by referring to himself as the Son of Man, the only available options to you are that Jesus is either mad, bad, or God. This is what C.S. Lewis writes in Mere Christianity. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for being a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronising nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Now, it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that Jesus was and is God. So how about you? Are you ready to accept his claim and to give your life to the Son of Man, who's fully God and fully human, who's been given divine dominion and glory, who will rule over an eternal and indestructible kingdom for all nations and peoples and languages and cultures? Well, if so, you can be part of that kingdom by repenting of your sin, believing that Jesus rose from the dead, and submitting to him as your Lord. And finally, these wonderful truths lead me to worship Jesus. Now, not many of our worship songs exalt Jesus as the Son of Man, but there's nothing stopping us from doing so in our own words and actions. The profound mystery has now been revealed. And it's so amazing. So amazing that nobody really imagined it or had anticipated, even though the clues were there all along. And it's hard even now for us to fully comprehend. But the wonderful truth is, there's a human being on the heavenly throne. God himself, who became one of us. He's the one who can now simultaneously sympathize with our frailty, yet rule with all divine might and glory and power in all eternity. So let us worship Jesus, the Son of Man.